it is a humanitarian crisis, which has forced upon us a big experiment, an unintended experiment. But it's also saying that we'll have to rebuild from the crisis and for sustainability, for our health. But how do we do that? And this is the critical question that we would want to debate today. But before I do that, let me first introduce you to the great panel that we have today. And I know this panel really does not require any introduction. Alok Jain, all of you know, Managing Director, Transconsult Asia Limited. And he has joined us all the way from Hong Kong to share with us the global learning curve and how Hong Kong, one of the epicenters as well, has reinventing its mobility, and which already has a great tradition of mass mobility. And then we have Laghu Parashar, Senior Technical Advisor from GIZ. But as all of you know, he has been deeply involved to guide the city and the state governments to plan and design public transport. Both of them bring to us huge amount of knowledge, experience, and wisdom to build solutions. But I also have with me my wonderful colleagues. I have Ananya Das and Sayan Roy, who have deeply researched the issues we are discussing. They have also carried out an interesting survey, and we are going to share that with you. And off stage, I have Shantanu, Shubham, Vivek, who have contributed to this whole exercise. So now, without much wasting time, I'll just do a brief introduction to what it really means to us. How do we position this crisis, this strategy and this innovation? So let me just share my screen. I hope all of you can see that. So let me begin now with this. But as you can see, these are truly the photographs that we have been using widely in our past presentations. And I want to call it a past because this is something, these images, we cannot return back to this normal post-COVID. It's a resounding no. So if we cannot return to these images in our cities, then how do we build the agenda for the new normal? And this is the big question that we have in front of us. And this humanitarian crisis is so clear that we cannot let go this crisis waste. We will have to learn from it and work on it. And we have, all of us collectively have experienced the blue sky, traffic-free roads, and it's like surreal to us. And so when you look at this massive drop in pollution during the 3 phases of lockdown, and this is Delhi and NCR, you see a massive change in air quality. And even more interesting that when we look at the peak hour changes in the pollution during the day, the curve has flattened. And CPCB very recently told us that when the levels dropped in Delhi, one of the big contribution was from the transport sector in that decline. And so the question is, how do we build for the future now? How do we sustain the gains? And this disruption has been massive. While in India, public transport ridership came to a complete halt because our lockdown was complete. But in countries that did not lock down completely, continued to function their public transport, they have also seen a reduction of 70 to 90% in the public transport ridership. And this is a huge financial loss at a huge cost. And now they are finding new ways to survive. So how do we understand that issue? In fact, what we have seen, the data from across the world show that personal driving has increased while transit has reduced. Now, this force has evoked the fear that does this mean that we are going to see the cars and the two-wheelers coming back with a vengeance? Now, really recently, in CSC, we have crunched the Google mobility data, and everyone is looking at that to see how drastically the change in activity pattern has taken place in India. And understandably, and what you find here is, if you look at the way things have changed, that the trips for various purposes have changed dramatically. So while, because we are all working from home, the residential activities have increased by close to 30%. And whereas the visits to workplace has reduced by 60%, and to retail and recreation by as much as 84%. Now, this is how it is working out right now. So in this kind of a scenario, when we have to reopen now, and we certainly have to reopen the economy, and the economy cannot be reopened if you do not have mobility, if you do not have transport, you cannot even secure livelihood. And so how do we therefore reinvent for that when the public transport has drawn so much of stigma? There is lack of confidence today. People are fearful of catching infection. So therefore, what we are noticing globally and in this country, that the immediate move is to have guidelines for hygiene, sanitation, physical distancing, cashless transaction for ticketing, all kinds of rules are coming in. But this requires disciplined enforcement. But at the same time, we know that revival is not going to be easy. With loss of ridership, huge financial losses have happened. So how are the bus operators are going to revive and reinvent themselves? And we are seeing some of them are already thinking about it. So how do we address the stress system? Now, what we found that, reopening essentially would mean that you have to maximize the operations based on what you have immediately. And the deficit is already big because we don't have enough. So how do we maximize the use of whatever we have? Now, interestingly, in Delhi, for instance, we did a very quick ballpark, and Shayan did this calculation. He can reflect on this later. And what we have seen here, that Delhi, which is operating about 5,400 buses between DTC and gyms, okay, so together they were pre-COVID pandemic, had the total service capacity of more than 700 lakh kilometer per day. But now with the new physical distancing norms, this has reduced to little more than 200. Now this means if Delhi has to maintain and meet the pre-pandemic level demand, then Delhi additionally requires more than 13,000 buses. But if you can be a little bit more inventive, if you have bus priority lane to increase the kilometer per bus, then perhaps you can reduce that additional requirement to 10,000 buses. But even then, that is a huge number. But we still have to look at any optimal, any method that is used to optimize and maximize the use. But that also means that we need parallel method to reduce the overall demand on the hugely stressed system. Now, this is also telling us that recently when we looked around and we have just noticed what's going on, the reality check, yes, they are trying to follow the guidelines, even though there are sometimes it is tough to follow the guidelines. But if the conductor is at the back, the people are boarding from both sides. So some of these discipline will have to be brought in. But at the same time, we need to keep in mind that for the lower income group, the paratransit, the Grameen Seva, and when they have absolutely no ways of increasing the affordable services for them, I mean, it is really going to be a big challenge for us. So we have to therefore build on this whole opportunity that is emerging to look at all the methods, the active transportation, and this is something I'm going to reflect a little bit more on, because in India, the data is showing that how during the lockdown period, we have seen that the share of walk trips has increased more beyond the driving trips. So how do we build on this? And at the same time, the massive lifestyle adjustment that we have seen, work from home, staggered timing, all kinds of roster methods of working, how can all of these be therefore leveraged and institutionalized to reduce need for unnecessary travel and also to reduce pressure on the systems? Now, here I just want to very quickly, before I open it up for the panelists, just want to highlight some very interesting conclusions that have come from an ongoing survey that we are doing. It's a glimpse of a survey from the middle and the high income group in Delhi NCR. There is another one that is going on for the lower income group, and we will come back to you with that later. But let's see how the middle and the high income group are reflecting on their choices of commuting now and later, their vehicle ownership intentions, and therefore can this give us an insight into the way we are going to be looking at. It's very interesting. When we ask them that when we will be choosing public transport, how will you rank these basic elements? And everyone, we find that the health safety has become the top concern. And everyone has said, and over all respondents here, that that's what is the topmost that they will be looking at, followed by road safety, availability of motor transport, other options, comfort, distance of trip, cost of journey, and environmental consciousness, in that order. The only difference is when we look specifically at the high income group, for them, comfort comes even higher than health. So that is an interesting insight, and which also gives us that how do we want to design the systems in the future. The respondents that we had from the region, what we have found that the majority, about 52% of them own vehicles, and 12% who do not own vehicles. Now, overall, what they are saying that in the immediate 6 months or the near future, they will be interested in buying new vehicles. About 28%. But it's interesting when we ask that 12% about who do not own any vehicle, and therefore what would they want to do? Their 43% said that they would not want to buy any vehicle. So these are also interesting telltale signs that are coming out from the overall. Also very interesting that what we have, that in the next 6 months, we are also seeing very interesting changes. In the short term, within the 6 months, what we are finding that the metro ridership is expected to decline from 37% at pre-COVID level to 16%. And the bus, which is not a very popular transport in the NCR in this income category, will also reduce further. But cars and two-wheelers will increase from 28% in post-COVID to 38%, 28% pre-COVID to 38% post-COVID immediately. But the encouraging sign is that the walk and cycle share will increase from 4% pre-COVID to 12% in the near term. And even more interesting is when we see the long term, the next 1 to 2 years and beyond. In that, we find that the bus and the metro share will actually increase from 45% in pre-COVID time to 47% in that long time frame. And use of personal transport, cars and two-wheelers show an arrested trend, which is actually declining from 35% to 31%. And and also walk and cycle share is showing an overall increase. Now, these are intentions. This is what they are telling us that they would want to do. And when we ask them more specifically, they said that the reasons for choosing public transport, the majority are saying that they would want to, about 73% of them would want to shift to public transport if high quality public transport can be assured. 22% will continue with vehicles. But about 38%, they are saying they will prefer public transport because of the connectivity. And they are also saying that, and the 23% each, they are saying for them what matters is if their effective cost effectiveness and sustainability. And 16% saying that, to avoid traffic. Now, the interesting point is, if there is such a latent demand for public transport, then can we intervene to build that up? Now, in that, what is fascinating is that we also ask them that, okay, fine, when you have the good public transport, you will shift to public transport. But let us understand that today, do you have good, comfortable access to public transport? No. And what came out that how disadvantaged most of them are. Close to 40% have access to bus stop beyond 500 meters. And 69% have access to metro beyond 500 meters. I'm talking about overall Delhi NCR. Okay, individually for cities, it's also going to change. And also the advantages, but at the same time, about 34% have bus stop within 200 meters, and 11% have access to metro within 200 meters. So the question is, can the whole economic reconstruction process be linked with building of this convenient infrastructure to improve and the whole stimulus package? Can it completely redesign our systems to improve access? So just the last couple of points, that we also found that during the next 6 months, the distance of the trip, work trip, will also determine the mode choice. And the most important point that I would like to highlight in this is that about what we are finding, that in the short distance range, that below 5 kilometer, the share of the walk trip increases dramatically. Which was some 14% to 43%. That is the latent demand for walking and cycling in the society right now. So within 5 kilometers, people have said that they would want to walk and cycle more, and the share has increased, in the intention has increased from 14 to 46%. How do we build on that? So with that, the one thing that has also come out, that there is also a huge interest to reduce the overall travel requirement. And therefore, this whole experiment that is happening right now, where we have opted for work from home, which we find that the staggering 54% are saying they would want to continue with that, 34% saying they want flexible timing, only 12% saying that office is also desirable. But the fact of the matter is that all of them are saying that in coming future, the mobility pattern is going to change dramatically for them. While their essential trips will continue to remain the same, but social trips, recreation trips are going to decline dramatically. Now, this means that if we can institutionalize some of these changes going forward, not only to reduce overall unnecessary trips, emissions, and energy guzzling, but this is also needed in the near term to reduce the overall burden on the public transport system. And this is exactly what we are learning from the global experience. So everywhere we are finding now, whether you're looking at European cities, Asian cities, US cities, especially London, that there are such dramatic changes they are trying to bring about in the mobility paradigm. And if I just flag off the example of London, what you find that now there is a mayor's plan, and they are saying very categorically that the entire change now has to be based on the whole walking and cycling street-based program to reduce pressure on public transport and make the city more accessible. They have even found that before COVID, about 45% of daily trips were within 5 kilometers, which can be easily converted to walking and cycling trips. And therefore, what they call these pop-up temporary bike lanes are emerging across the city. And they're making big investment in different cities to walking and cycling infrastructure. In fact, bike count has increased by 74% to 470%, depending on what city are you looking at globally. And even the bicycle sales have gone up dramatically. And they are reclaiming the cities and redoing the space for the people. And this is what the contact-free, independent mobility is all about. That's where people feel safe. And this what can complement the overall public transport strategy to keep the entire system efficient and functional. So this big landscape, London is a big thing. And more important, in London, even after doing all of this today, London is proposing to increase their their congestion charging from June 22nd from 11 UK pounds to 15 UK pounds. And that's the way the whole paradigm is today. So everything is coming together for them. The public transport, active transport, vehicle restraint, and the restraint on the whole overall need to do the movement. So finally, therefore, let me end here, but let me flag off, because this is where we want to articulate our questions for the panel and for all of you. And first of all, how do we now rebuild public confidence in safe public transport? This is absolutely necessary, and I am not willing to believe the fact that if we can step out to go to our offices, step out to go to the market, and follow social distancing to keep ourselves safe, then we should not make an exception of the public transport system and say that that is the most dangerous. So that myth will also have to be busted, but yes, we will have to do this with absolute discipline. Second, how do we design reform-based fiscal package and fiscal instruments to support revival? How do we reduce cost on the overall bus system? How do we adopt measure to alleviate pressure on already strained public transport? How do we meet immediate demand for reopening the economy? And how do we, at an emergency level, scale up the active transportation, footpaths, cycle lanes, and which will work for all income groups, and even make the higher income group the captive user of this, and which can be done very quickly, and that is something that is planning. We also need a strategy to leverage the measures we have adopted to reduce our unnecessary movement. And so the work from home, roster-based attendance, not only to cut down unnecessary travel, but also to reduce pressure on public transport. We need to implement long-term strategies also to augment integrated public transport and services, which is already the big mandate with all our city governments. And the last point, where I have not gone into detail, but I'm sure this matter is going to come up, because in everyone's mind today it is that as we think about economic reconstruction and fiscal packages for the transportation sector, for the automobile industry, how will our ambition for electric mobility will play out in the future? What strategy do we need to enable electric mobility to move forward, and how can we quicken that process? So clearly, as you can understand, these are our critical questions that we have in our mind. And today, all of you sitting here, and I'm told that in this room right now, we have about more than 700 registered audience. And this is a huge gathering here. So I'm sure many of you will have more questions. But before we get into that direct conversation with you, I would like to first ask our panelists to first convey and share with you that what is their perspective, how do they understand the challenge, and more important, how do they understand the solutions in the short term, and how do they understand the solutions in the longer term, and how can we inform our government better? So thank you with that. So now what I'll do, I'll invite Alok Jain to make the presentation. So let me close my presentation here. So Alok, it would be wonderful if you can begin your presentation. So we will listen to you, we will listen to Ladhu, and then we will take on all the questions and have the conversation.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, Alok, we can see your screen.
Okay, hello everybody. So Anubita has actually obviously started with a great introduction, with a lot of impact around the world. Unfortunately, my presentation is not going to be as exciting because there is not a dramatic story here. My story is about doing not very radical measures on public transport, keeping public transport as it is, enhancing its qualities in the city, and making sure it is part of everybody's life. So it is, when it becomes a lifestyle issue, then public transport is always sustainable. And in any city, public transport is the core, should remain the core of mobility. So quickly, obviously, all these scenes you have seen, and I won't go into the details. The cities are empty all over the world. This is a very famous picture of India Gate. And we know what the problem was here is the vehicular pollution is primarily one of the major issues for two sides of the picture. On the left, you see all this dusty, dirty stuff. On the right side, you see very clean. And again, we all know that a lot of these pollution is currently due to the high usage of private cars, polluting vehicles, and we need to improve the vehicle lot. We need to move a lot more people on public transport. So this impact slide, I won't spend time because Namita has already covered that. But you see all around the world, we are now talking about completely new terminology when it comes to public transport. Social distancing, stay away, stay home, travel ban, and all these other words. TFL's Twitter handle, this is how it looks. It says, stay home, don't travel, save lives. And to me, this is really a lot of public response that you see, and on those slides that you Anumita presented from the survey. I do feel that that really has scared people um, unnecessarily against traveling, against using public transport, which is in a way doing disservice to returning to normalcy, in my opinion. This is a famous quote from Sadiq Khan, who is the mayor of London. And he says, I urge all Londoners to do their bit to keep our transport workers safe by only using public transport if you have no other alternative. Honestly, this is something I personally feel that this is a complete disservice to public transport, disservice to whole mobility dialogue that we are having in various cities all around the world. Just before the COVID, if you look at SDG goals, if you look at UN COP23 declarations, we are all talking about making public transport as the core of travel. And now we are going completely opposite. This is, to me, is non-scientific, ill-advised policies that they are making at the moment. Just one second. Yeah. Okay. They did a survey in London, UK, and in UK, the survey they found that almost 1/5 of the people would not use public transport when the travel restrictions are gone taken away, and that is really an impact that we have to live with. So our problems are obviously rising unemployment because of because of the economy, poor economy. So less people are traveling. A lot of people are working from home. Social distancing is more in everybody's mind. And of course, we want to do a lot of things in public transport. When we talk about social distancing, and if we want to reduce the capacity of the buses to 30% of what it is today, you suddenly need 3 times the vehicles. So where is the money going to come from? And we talk about congestion, the road space, all those other issues that start to arise. So, but the big thing is that we don't know what is going to happen. I think a lot of people ask me this question, when this is going to go away, when will the normal return? Nobody can answer that. Nobody knows anything about this. We still don't know when the vaccine is going to be available, when the treatment is going to be available. So within all these uncertainties, what do you do? How do you keep economy running? Cars cannot run city. We have seen time and again in all over the world that the cars are not the solution. And good public transport is what actually makes the economy work. So, but automobile sector is obviously, they're playing on the current fear of this corona, and they're supporting this social distancing, and they're positioning car as a way of solution. On the other side, you see non-motorized transport, which is coming, as you saw figures from London and many other places in the world. Use of non-motorized transport has gone up, but there is a limit on non-motorized transport, which is to do with distances. And second is the weather. When in countries where the weather is not really in your favor, uh, this doesn't really happen. I mean, I was just talking to my brother in Delhi this morning, and the temperature is 45 degrees. Now, really, how long can you walk in 45 degrees, or how long can you bicycle in 45 degrees? So you need a motorized transport. I think that is inevitable. Once you go into motorized transport, then your choice is whether you use a car or you use a bus or a train. And obviously, for cities' health, bus and train are better solutions. So we need to focus ourselves on how we can again bring the focus back to public transport and put non-motorized transport as a first leg, last leg support system. So a lot of digital tools are being developed in context of public transport, in context of cities. So there are tools related to documentation of where people are, where they have been. A lot of modeling work that is happening on how the disease is spreading in the cities, and a lot of contact tracing work on how the disease is spreading with through different kind of contacts. So a lot of these tools, and I think in India they're using currently this Arogya Setu, which is very similar to doing this kind of work. So data about people's movement, there's a lot of data that is being collected and is in public domain at the moment. And how can we use this data? Now that is obviously a question, and how we can utilize this to improve our proposition in the market. A lot of discussion around integration, institutional integration, ticketing integration. We talked about this contactless payment system, physical integration of infrastructure that's happening, communication and information in the public domain, how we provide information through a single interface on people's phone. So a lot of discussion around that is happening, and digitalization is really the means to achieve all these different various form of integration. A new trend that has emerged all around the world is a demand responsive transit. So in the past, when the demand was higher than the capacity that we could deliver in the cities, the fixed route transport worked very well. So we had fixed schedule, fixed route, fixed fare. Nobody has to think anything, and we will just keep running it whether there's a demand or not. Whether it's a bus is 20% full or 80% full, we just keep them running. The world has changed. We know the demand has significantly reduced. And in that world, where the demand is less than the capacity that we have on hand, a demand responsive transit is really making a resurgence, because here you can choose your vehicle, you can choose your time of travel, you can choose your route, you can choose your price. And considering all that in one framework, this kind of demand responsive transport using a technological backbone is really providing solution in many gaps, especially when the demand is less in low density areas, in off peak times, or for those group of people for whom conventional public transport is not really available. So this is a picture from London, DialARide service, which is provided for old people and disabled people, and it is of course supported by the Gurdwara there. So it's a great service. Micromobility, we talked about bicycles, but some of these is shared scooter services, shared bicycles that are coming all over the world. But there are still problems with supply demand mismatch. As I talked about, as I said, all weather is an issue. Safety is an issue. Right of way conflicts are becoming an issue, because if they are on the footpath, they collide with people. If they are on the road, they collide with vehicles. And obviously, that is creating a lot new type of issues. Unless you start segregating them and providing them proper space on the road, which in some places is easy, some places is difficult. London and Paris have taken a very radical approach towards this. They're putting a lot of new bicycle lanes, but in many other countries, it's politically infeasible. Social distancing, this is a picture from China. This is certainly, if you look at this capacity, I would personally say that don't run public transport, and better to provide everybody a car, because this is really not serving as a public transport. Masks, there's a lot of discussion around masks. Now, this is a picture I took just a few days ago on a street in Hong Kong. And you can see there is no social distancing practiced, but literally everybody is in the mask. Now, if you do a correlation around cities around the world, which have not done any lockdown, which have not done any social distancing, which have not done any restriction on public transport, but insisted on mask wearing, or encouraged people to wear masks, all those countries have very low rate of infection. They are Taiwan, South Korea, Hong Kong. Um, in Singapore, in the early stages, they actually said masks were not necessary and don't wear masks. And unfortunately, Singapore, the infection rates shot up, and now it is mandatory for you to wear mask in Singapore. Otherwise, you're fined 5,000 Singapore dollars. So masks have proven to be one of the great mechanisms to control spread of COVID. So facial coverings. This is just a social media hashtag of what is happening around the world on what are the top 6 categories for hashtags on different kind of platform, Instagram and Facebook here. Social media has seen a boom, absolute boom. So if you see what happened due to coronavirus in Italy, at the peak of the coronavirus spread in Italy, Facebook had a 70% more traffic than normal because everybody was in a lockdown. And I guess that was the time. So people were using social media as the primary channel for getting the news, for getting connection with people, and getting information about rest of the world. There was a lot of wit and humor that was going around. So people were not as depressed as one would like to think. People were trying to get out of this depressing situation through wit and humor. And obviously, India was bursting with memes and TikTok videos on WhatsApp, and it was going around, and there were all kind of humorous effort that was happening. So to me, that's a positive side of humanity that we need to encash on. And we are ultimately social animals. We need to meet people, we need to see people, we need to interact with people, and there is no better thing than public transport to do those things. And obviously public transport is not the only one who is suffering because of downturn in business. This is a picture from a restaurant in Hong Kong, and you can see how many, they have cut out all these tables because there is not much traffic, and of course they're trying to implement social distancing here. So Hong Kong, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Hong Kong, but it's a city which has 90% of the daily trips made on public transport. Public transport is the backbone, lifeline of this city. We can't really afford to stop anything here because otherwise the whole city shuts. And there was no lockdown here. There was none of those, even though we saw a lot of drop in public transport ridership. So 40% on weekdays, 50 to 60% on weekends. But all the buses and trains throughout this period, entire period, Hong Kong, if you know, we are just next to China. We literally adjacent to China, mainland China, and uh, we had COVID cases at very very early stages. So even as early as January end, we had cases in Hong Kong for COVID, and yet until today we never had a lockdown. We never had a stoppage of service. The bus and trains are running continuously. There is no restriction on people's movement. There is absolutely no infection in last over a month. In fact, we are working absolutely normal now. We are going to offices. All the offices are open. The schools open today. Everything is kind of back to normal, slowly getting back to normal in Hong Kong now. Okay. How we manage this? We manage it through putting, of course, city on alert. So there were some immediate measures that were taken. Was primary and secondary schools were shut down in January, and we are opening only now. So today was the first day of school opening here. Public health control, lot of education, public education program, a lot of surveillance. So Hong Kong follows this track, trace, isolate, and treat. So these four methods. So you first identify the people, and it's nothing to do with transport, but it is citywide public health control measure in response to any pandemic diseases. All of these mechanisms were developed in 2003 when we had the SARS virus scare, and the rest of the world was not affected as much. But I was running the train services in those days in Hong Kong, and I can tell you, we almost had a very similar situation to what you're seeing with COVID-19 at this time. And the trains were empty. We developed, and that was the first time for us. So we developed a lot of mechanisms and routines and plan of actions, SOPs in place to respond to something of that situation. So cleaning, sterilizing, disinfection, all those programs were developed at that time, and which we are following today as well. So it was not a means of stepping up for us. It was just activation of a certain program that we already knew. So there was nothing very surprising here as far as this particular infection or this particular pandemic was concerned. From a regulatory perspective, the authority side, they have been just doing this much. They have been giving the health advice to people. They're doing a lot of publicity effort, and they are monitoring what the preventive measures are being taken by the various transport operators. So there's a lot of learning, sharing. There is no hard-hitting rules that are coming through. There are no stoppages, as I said. There are nothing of that sort, but it's a lot of collaborative, cooperative effort that is happening all across the public transport and the regulatory bodies, where we are working together to make sure the people are looked after and people can move from A to B safely. So far, there has been zero infection throughout this period on the public transport system. There have been zero infection of public transport workers. So intensified cleaning, provision of face masks, public education. Now, public education, this is the philosophy we basically use here. So it's a you say it again, you say it again, you say it again, you say it again, and then again and again and again and again. And this is about the time you are absolutely sick of saying. That's when somebody hears it for the first time. So you have to keep repeating. So if you walk around in Hong Kong, you will see literally every lift has a sticker which says how many times it is cleaned, the frequency of cleaning, every escalator, every handle, door handle, every security system, everywhere where you have to touch something, you will find a label which says it is cleaned and it is maintained, it is disinfected every half an hour, every 1 hour, every 2 hours. And this is the confidence building. But at the same time, this is also providing people with education that this is what they need to be aware of all the time. They need to keep themselves safe. They need to keep themselves clean. On the financial support side, now obviously as a finance, this is obviously big impact on the economy as well as on public transport sector itself, industry itself. So what government has done, they have given a one-off cash grant of 10,000 Hong Kong dollars to all Hong Kong permanent residents. 10,000 Hong Kong dollar in rupee terms would translate to roughly 1 lakh rupees. So that has been given as a one-off cash grant. Then public transport fare subsidy scheme. This was launched 2 years ago, much before COVID, where if you use public transport in a month for $400 and above, then anything above $400 spending, you get 25% rebate back from the government to a cap of $400. Now, as a part of this response to this epidemic, government has reduced this subsidy scheme from $400 to $200. So roughly, I would say 60% of the Hong Kong population would benefit from this public transport subsidy scheme. MTRC, which is 50% market share of travel in public transport in Hong Kong, and they will reduce their fares by 20% for 6 months starting July 1st. Now, MTRC is a listed company in stock exchange, but government is 75% owner, and government is subsidizing this fare reduction by 50%. So they're sharing half with them. For the employees of the public transport sector, the government has launched this employment support scheme where 50% of the wages, which is capped to 9,000 per month for 6 months, will be given to the employers as long as they keep the employees working and there are no redundancies and there is no reduction in services. Okay, so this is to make sure that the people unemployment in public transport sector is maintained, and at the same time there are hard restrictions on employers to keep them running, keep the employees in place, because that's also an incentive. Now, public transport in Hong Kong is also all run by private entities except MTR. Okay. For the individual sectors, franchise buses, government is giving 1/3 of the fuel subsidy, energy subsidy for 6 months. They are also covering all the regular repair and maintenance costs for buses and trams and ferries. They are also reimbursing the insurance premium again for a period of 6 months. For taxis and minibuses, there is a discount on LPG. So again, fuel subsidy, and also for non-LPG vehicles, it's 1/3 of the actual fuel cost. On the one-off subsidy, every minivan operator gets 30,000 per vehicle as a non-accountable subsidy. So it's just the money that to support them. And to vehicles for the taxis, it's again another 30,000. And the drivers of those modes of transport who actually are not considered employees, they are usually considered a contract worker because they rent the vehicle on a daily basis and then they drive them. They are also getting a monthly subsidy of 6,000 for 6 months. Non-franchise buses are usually these contract hire buses, school buses, employee services, residential services. They are also getting 20,000 Hong Kong dollar per bus as a subsidy, and and 30,000 for each. And first stop was 20,000, and then 30,000 was top up later on. So what is happening right now is that we, of course, want to get back, and how to get back. And the biggest weapon in our armory here is the data that we have. Okay, we have always relied on good quality data when we provide the services in Hong Kong, and public transport in Hong Kong has always been one of the most efficient ones around the planet. So if you look at the cost, even though Hong Kong is a very expensive city to live in, public transport is one of the cheapest in this region, and the quality of service is very high, and they are all profitable. So you can imagine that how to deliver that is again relying a lot on data and efficiency and performance of various services. So on the recovery side, what is happening in Hong Kong or around the world is that we are also looking at a lot of these regulatory frameworks, because regulatory frameworks in the past were very restrictive. They were not allowing bus companies or train companies to change the routes as frequently, change the fares as frequently. So the flexibility that are needed in the current world, which were supposed to be based on what we call data-driven infrastructure, that cannot be delivered. Even if you have a data, even if you have a proposal, if it takes you a year to implement a route change, then it's completely ineffective. So a lot happening on that front to bring things to make it more agile. Cities response plans more agile. Cooperation and collaboration among public transport operator or the IPT, the buses and taxis, shared services, Ubers and the lifts. Policy measures against car usage. We saw some of the examples in Anumita's presentation. A lot happening around the world. Everybody's talking about ERP, parking restrictions, bicycle lanes, and so on and so forth, bus lanes, improving the performance and efficiency. Now, this is one area which is not talked about as much. Most countries around the world are basically saying we can't do anything, and they're asking government for money. The approach in here has been always that we can do from internal measures, which is performance and efficiency oriented. We basically run our system to a super efficient level where there is nothing left to, from a financial perspective, we can't take out anymore, and we are constantly working on it. And there are a lot of applications now that we are looking at which are artificial intelligence based, machine learning based, and idea is to take it to the next level now. Non-fare revenue. We focus a lot on fare revenue in most of the world as when public transport is concerned. But again, if you look at models like Hong Kong, Singapore, Taiwan, Korea, Japan, 30 to 40% of the fare revenue, 30 to 40% of the revenue of public transport operators is actually coming from non-fare. And these are the countries which actually have been able to support their public transport because of this extra sources of revenue. So the dependency is much less. Marketing and communication is hugely important. What I was reading it somewhere that automobile companies are now planning billions of dollars of package in marketing to advertise why cars are safe and why cars should be used in the post-COVID scenario as a recovery option. But this is just fooling you. The cities don't have space to accommodate so many cars. If you are talking about 20-25% of the urban roads, urban space given to roads, they are going to be filled in very quickly. I have seen Bombay, Delhi, and I can tell you these are completely unlivable cities when it comes to mobility, going from one place to another. I love these cities. I have my family in these cities, a lot of friends in these cities. I love these places. Food is great. Being an Indian, obviously, I look forward to going back. But if you want to get around to the city, these are not very pleasant places. So this is something we have to understand. Public transport moves you, and it really becomes core of. Sorry.
No, I mean there are questions are exploding. So we really want to maximize your.
Okay, so I'll quickly finish. And other area that I would like to emphasize is that employees, your employees are very big resource, good resource. You should leverage on employees to become ambassadors of public transport. These are some examples where the employees have gone wrong. So on the left, you see an article from New York. This is a subway bus conductor who wrote, he said, we are not essential, we are sacrificial. We are put forward on the front end because we are expendable basically. On the right, you see a London bus driver's family, and they blamed the public transport operator for his death. Unfortunately, a lot of people have died around the world who are public transport workers. Okay? But people are coming back and they are devising new ways of looking at things. And digital media, social media, very cheap, very easy to do, and becoming a great means to promote your methods, your messages, and public transport in general. And of course, if things come back, this is a picture from Hong Kong in one of the events. Masks are de rigueur here, and people are getting back to their normal old lives. So we are hoping that this will remain this way for us as we go forward. And obviously for rest of the world, again, it also ends in a well manner.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, Alok. That's really wonderful. And really, we were so keen to understand what's going on in Hong Kong, especially the fiscal strategy has been very valuable to understand. So, what we'll do now, we will quickly first listen to Laghu. And
Mhm.
because I can see a lot of questions already, the box is loaded. So, Laghu, we'll listen to you first that about the experience in India and how India is coping with the crisis and especially the bus sector. And then we'll open up to have a more intense conversation with everyone else.
Yeah, let me just share my. Yeah, can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can
Yes, we
see.
can see. We can see.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you very much, and very interesting previous two presentation, especially uh, Alok. It was motivating to see what Hong Kong is doing uh, as far as keeping the public transport up and running without uh, uh, without getting all those argument of whether it is it is dangerous to get into the public transport, the argument which we are facing currently right now. uh, I found your presentation very motivating, and at the same time I'll keep my presentation very brief because many of the things my previous two speakers have already talked about. So let's just see that what that mistrust on any crowding place, be it public transport is one of them, will remain in the immediate term to the short term, and people will remain little away from public transport and then migrate onto their private modes. Okay, especially the choice riders. So captive riders will still remain into the system, as one of the Anumita's surveys also reflecting. Uh, the captive riders will remain into the system till the time they can't afford any other alternate mode. So as a result, the public transport, which is already, when it comes on finances, already stressed in India. Okay, so our public transport, bus transport system was never doing good when it comes on finances. They were always in loss, and with this, the losses will further go high and go up. And eventually, what is going to happen out of it? That the planned investment on fleet upgradation, technology transition, and all those advancements which were planned for the public transport may take the back seat. Okay, and cities' current investment will be more go into the crisis management which they are facing right now and will be facing because of the less ridership and the less revenue. Eventually, the on the other side, what we can see is that once the people will, especially the choice rider, will start using the private modes, the congestion level will further go high on the road, and which is eventually the pollution will also go high. And with the higher congestion level, the investment in the widening of the road in making the flyovers, and all those road infrastructure upgradation will be preponed. Okay, so with the probably the current congestion level where any road widen may require after 20 years, with this kind of a situation, we may say that probably the cities might have to prepone those road widening work uh, by 15 year or 10 year. We can't predict the timeline, but eventually the big picture is that there will be lot of diversification when it comes on financing from public transport to the infrastructure, which is the road infrastructure, which will more facilitate the private vehicle use, and which might lead to a situation to a new normal. So what could be the new normal if we don't do anything? Okay, if we don't take the right actions at that level of scales, the new normal could be the more vehicles on the road, less space, again further lesser space for the pedestrian, cyclist, and the buses eventually for the public transport. But eventually what we need is a different new normal. Okay, the different new normal which should have a more space for equally distributed for the passengers, for the pedestrian, for the cyclists, for our buses and the public transport, and the lesser space for the private. Now to achieve this, if we don't do anything, eventually if we allow our public transport to go down and the private vehicle to take over our roads, we are eventually going to receive the new normal, which is the business as usual. But we need to take up the actions, and those actions are required to achieve. Many actions are required to achieve the desired level of new normal. Now, what could be those actions? So, some of the actions which Anumita also talks about, nothing new, and actually there's nothing new action plan which is required with these action plan were previously also talking about. The only thing we have to speed up, we need to scale up the things. We just can no longer wait to things to happen gradually. We need to be fast enough to adopt those situations to achieve this desired level of new normal. Because the business as usual normal will have a huge social and economic cost. Yeah. So we need to invest in our non-motorized transport infrastructure. The status of infrastructure which facilitate the non-motorized transport, which is the pedestrian, which is a cyclist, is not in a very good shape in our cities. Okay. The continuous footpath, the wider footpaths, cycling network, we need to invest more and more invest. It will not only provide the alternate to the choice riders which were supposed to get into their car and the two-wheeler, probably they should look at as cycling as alternate mode, if not the buses. Okay. To do that, we need to invest more and more in the NMT infrastructure. It can be a low cost, like one of the tactical urbanism which was done in a couple of cities, in Coimbatore, in a couple of cities it has been experiment, which is a low cost measure. With a little more enforcement, we may require a cycle track, exclusive cycle track, wide infrastructure. But the big picture is we need to invest. We can no longer wait for these things to happen the way it was happening previously. Invest in the bus priorities. So as Anumita was talking about, with that, to achieve that social distancing, our capacity of the bus system, our public transport system is going to be half. Okay. To maintain and to increase that level of supply, we need our bus to be faster on the road. Okay. We cannot afford that our buses are moving on the road with a 10 kilometer or 8 kilometer per hour. We need them to go faster so that the capacity offer with the same level of fleet, because in the short term and in the immediate term, we cannot increase the supply of the buses, supply of the public transport system. The only thing we can do, we can increase the speed of the buses. We're providing them exclusive lane, be it in terms of the way Bangalore is doing on a pilot basis, one of the corridor, providing exclusive lane, and be it in terms of a higher upgraded infrastructure like BRTS system, which is kind of a long-term solution. But again, the big picture is we need to prioritize our buses. We just cannot afford a situation which our big cities are in, where the buses are stuck up into traffic jam and they are unable to even complete their scheduled trips. So this need to be achieved to reach at the desired level of new normal. Digitalization. So I talked about the digitalization, and this is something which we have been trying since long, but still we are way behind what we wanted to achieve in our public transport system. Barring few metro system, and I could not recall any bus system probably, which have achieved a full scale of digitalization. Okay, we need to fully migrate from the paper ticketing to a digital ticketing system, surveillance system, the GPS enabled public transport system providing two-way communication to the passenger, and that develop that level of trust into the passenger on the public transport system. Okay. I just recall one small example. We in this pandemic situation, so Alok was talking about the data. So this digitalization effort ultimately also leads to the data, and data needs to be utilized for the planning, for the efficiency improvement of the public transport system, and giving the uh, right tool and right knowledge to the decision maker, uh, utilizing the database, mobility database. And for that, a huge level of investment is required in the digitalization. Okay. Even in this pandemic situation, when we were asked to help the city for kind of a immediate route planning with the given level of fleet, we could not do for those cities because there was no data available with the cities with the paper ticketing. Okay, the only one city which we could help where the data was available. Okay, so again, for the right planning, we need that kind of data, and for the database, we need to invest into digitalization of public transport, which we no longer wait. Despite that, we need to invest in more buses. Okay, in our urban India, we have currently close to 48,000 to 50,000 buses, while as per the broad estimate, our requirement are 250,000 buses. We just cannot afford to have such kind of gap between the demand and supply. Okay. So we need to have more and more investment and more buses and the better buses. The buses which are universally accessible, more comfortable, and a higher level of higher state-of-the-art buses. And wherever they're required, we need to invest into the metro rails also. Okay, bigger cities, higher trip length, with the integrated metro system connected, well integrated by buses and the first and last mile connectivity. That investment is required. Now the big event remain the funds. Okay, we can always talk about what is supposed to be done, and we should do that, we should do this, but where are the money for all doing all this thing? And especially when there is an inconsistency at a national level, when there is any scheme is available for the public transport, especially in the bus transport, the last scheme, exclusive scheme I could recall is 2013 program. Since then, we don't have any funding program for expansion of the fleet. STUs are already financially in stress, so they don't have further funding for the upgradation of infrastructure and migrating, transitioning towards the new technologies. ULBs again, they are not in a very financially good shape, so that they can fund the public transportation system. And majority of the, if you look at the budgets of our ULBs and development corporation, majority of the budget is allocated towards the road infrastructure, which eventually facilitate the private vehicles. So probably we need to shift from this business as usual financing framework, and we need to create, as Anumita talked about, we need to create a consistent national level funding program for the public transport system. We currently have the funding program, consistent funding program for the metro system, but we need to have something similar for the bus transport system, more of a period from 5 to 10 years. Okay, it should be reforms driven. That's something which we have eventually has already done, and so something which we require at the national level to provide that kind of a impetus to the bus transport system and the non-motorized transport also. We need to prioritize our budgets so that funds available, the limited funds available with the ULBs can be diverted more towards the public transport and the non-motorized transport rather than the flyovers and the steps, flyover and the road widening. So this is all about the prioritization. Okay, so it's not that the funds are not available. It's just about where the funds are being routed. And the last but not the most important thing is that we need to identify the new revenue sources. We just cannot depend on the conventional revenue sources. Although Alok talked about the non-fare revenue, which is 30 to 35% in the country he was mentioning. In our case, which is quite in the range of 3 to 4%. I can talk maximum these are the scale. And so what could be, where else we can find out these revenue sources to fund this kind of a investment requirement in various things which we talked about. Sorry. Yeah. So if you look at the investment and the infrastructure which we have, with the new normal which we are desired to create, which is the well-developed public transport system combined with the non-motorized transport infrastructure, eventually people are going to benefit. Who all are going to be benefited out of it? One is the public transport user. Of course, public transport user should pay whatever he can pay within its affordability. But affordability and financial sustainability, unfortunately, do not match. Okay, you can probably, Hong Kong can be a extreme, but in many of the cases, these things, it's difficult to marry these two things. So to some extent, you can recover these from the public transport user directly, but there are other beneficiary also of these systems. Non-public transport user, because they are getting the better environment, less congested road, so they are supposed to compensate. The people and the activities which are getting the better access of public transport system, they are getting benefited out of it. So they are eventually the indirect beneficiary, and society as a whole is the indirect beneficiary of the good public transport and infrastructure. As they are getting a good cities, less polluted cities with less noise pollution and the air pollution, and with less accidents on the road. So eventually all these beneficiaries should contribute towards the development of this kind of a new normal, which is the well-developed public transport and non-motorized transport. I'll just give you a few examples. It's not something which hypothetical. This thought is about, there are few states and cities which are eventually doing this thing and which have been doing from some more than 10 years. So take an example of Rajasthan. Rajasthan Urban Transport Infrastructure Development Fund. And they eventually collect this fund from cess on the motor vehicle tax and or the private vehicles and vehicle registration, which is called as a green tax. Cess on the stamp duty on under the Rajasthan stamp duty, which they call as the access. They are improving the access to the public transport, so they apply 5% further cess on the stamp duty, and the CSR fund and whatever the contribution is coming from the state and the central bodies. The annual collection of this fund is close to 250 crore, and which is used for funding the metro, Rajasthan roadways, and the bus transport system and various urban transport infrastructure development. So this is something example which exists since 2010 in Rajasthan. Another interesting example is the Delhi. So Delhi has three examples: air ambient fund, which is imposing the cess on the diesel sale, which is used for subsidizing the electric buses. Recently, the ECC was imposed on vehicles entering to the Delhi, which are not destined to the Delhi, which is LCV and the SCV categories vehicle. They charge this. And the EPC, Environment Protection Charge, which is 1% of the cost of the diesel bus, which is more than 2000 cc. So these are some of the examples which states and cities, other states and cities can also explore to raise the fund, which they can utilize to upgrade their infrastructure. With this, I'll just, this is the brief update from my side, and I'll just pass it to Anumita. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Laghu. This is fascinating to listen to this, and with very concrete suggestions and to the way forward. So, so should we now get back to the discussion? So, Laghu, you are done, right?
Yeah, just trying to close it.
Oh, you had another slide? Sorry. Please go ahead. I thought it was the last one.
No, it's over. I was just trying to disconnect. Yeah.
Okay, fine. Sure. No, this is fascinating listening to both of you. And so now, in fact, now when I'm looking at the box, we have more than 113 questions, okay, which we cannot even deal with in this day. But we will certainly reply to those questions, put them up on the website. But immediately, I just want to flag off a couple of comments that we have seen. It's very interesting to see that Mr. Tulsi Sitola, who was head of the Ministry of Transport in Nepal, and now he's the senior advisor there, And he is saying that we are also going to open up soon, and therefore I'm looking at this conversation to get a good some takeaways to inform our strategy. So I'm very happy, Mr. Sitola, and good to know that you have connected. We have met long time ago. So I hope you have really found the method, some good suggestions. We also have Tali Brook, and he's from South Africa. And he's asking a very interesting question. He's saying that in our part of the world, we are seeing decline in ridership, transit ridership, but along with that, we are seeing the whole shift towards minibuses and informal system. And we do not know how to address that from the perspective of hygiene, sanitation, and overall. So that's very interesting. So what I'll do now, there are two specific questions also for CSC, and therefore Shayon and Ananya, I will ask both of you to reflect on that. They're asking that given the Delhi bus assessment that we have done, that how do we manage demand with alternative strategies? And there's a specific question that how do we even begin to do mapping of local the activities to be able to come up with good neighborhood plans. So that's something Shayon and Ananya you can handle. And then I'll come back to Alok and Laghu. There are many questions about what is the future of electric mobility, electric buses, and where should we go? So I would want both of you to reflect on that. So if quickly, very quickly, Shayon and Ananya, if you can reflect on those two issues, and then we will get back to Alok and Laghu to reflect on those other issues.
Okay. Hello. Is it audible, my voice?
Yeah, it's
Yes.
Okay. So regarding the daily assessment, as ma'am already has explained that if we wants to go back to the previous kind of service capacity, we need almost like 13,000 additional buses. Considering that they have to follow the social distancing norms, but of 20 person per bus. So in that case, one of the strategies to upgrade the capacity of the bus system, which is already been presented in that as another scenario, that if we integrate it, we increase this capacity by providing the bus lanes, and if we have seen that if we increase the speed of the bus by 5 kilometers per hour, then buses can fly up to 240 kilometers per day. So in that case, almost like 3,000 buses we can save. We can reach the previous level of service capacity by 10,000 buses. But even that, it is totally clear that to augment this many buses through various sources and to manage it is very difficult for the transit authorities, because currently Delhi is operating almost like half of it. So if they don't have, it is suddenly to create that kind of transit infrastructure and that kind of facilities to manage and operate, it will be huge painstaking stuff for the authorities. So probably for time being, till the date we are experiencing this social distance or applying the social distancing norms, probably what we have to do, we have to move into some other kind of alternate strategies, keeping in mind that obviously we have to provide the we have to use the optimum use of public transport, and simultaneously we also have to see how we are going to reduce the overall trip of the city. So one of few of the strategies which has already been discussed and ma'am or by the all of our speakers. So some of those things like stagger timing, like yeah, promoting the NMT mode of transport, while cities can create their cycle lanes and those kind of facilities, so that people can more use of bikes and they can walk to their destination. And another thing is that we are already in right now we are forcefully we are doing the working from homes, but authorities can also think about giving some incentives to the different corporates and then offices, so that they can also think about doing it for the longer term, and they can also use, or maybe they can force it for some time to work people for certain sectors who can do that part, those kind of do their work from home kind of activities. So they can force it in a way so that our overall mobility need will be reduced for time being. Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
And regarding that activity mapping, Ananya, you want to add?
Yeah, Ananya, can you take on that aspect?
Yeah, so like since a lot of our questions is on this, how compact cities and how neighborhood can be made more, mobile, and there are many queries about compact neighborhoods. How now, if we see how global trends has been emerging, it's been emerging towards walking and cycling. We have to know why, because first of all, it gives us the freedom to move, and it helps us to keep retain our safety, since social distancing is the norm now. And I think overall people this is a very upfront emerging solution now. Talking it in Indian perspective, as our presentations, you must have seen how why the importance of walkability and building cycling neighborhoods is important. Now after this pandemic, I'm sure this gap must have been very clear to everyone, the way we are functioning, the digital world. This excludes the scope to only a limited few. Similarly, we are being able to work, but across other sectors, there are sectors which are mostly dependent on working closer. Now, if we look at our census, it says around 60% of our trips are closer trips. But if we see our infrastructure, the infrastructure gaps are heavily, though we have been speaking about complexities and building walking and cycling neighborhood and building up the influence area within our metros, but the reality is different in even in Delhi. If I take up the case studies of Delhi, so it's really important to build compact neighborhood, because the ideal thing that it addresses is to reduce the overall need to mobile. Now we stay far, our utility services are far, we have been depending on a lot of apps and everything for commuting, but it's still not reducing the amount of mobility. It's still increasing some way or the other, though we are not using. But building closer neighborhood, building things closer will reduce that, and it would not only bring things close, it will give us freedom to move around. I think that's how our cities should now go back to basics and start looking from how we walk around ourselves, like closer to homes, because that's where is the basic need. And as we know, each of us is do walk at some point of the time. So why not work for towards that? And cities need to think about this more now.
Absolutely. Great. Thanks a ton, Ananya. That certainly is what is coming out of our study as well.
Yeah.
That the distances. So that's the way forward. I'm just rushing now because the time is against us. But we were just extending the time a little bit, because as I'm seeing the questions, especially Alok and Laghu, there are many, many questions on the financial strategy, how they are going to, how India is going to cope up, how the operators are going to cope up, what kind of strategies they need to adopt. And then there are a lot of questions related to standard operating procedures that the operators need to adopt so that they can improve the efficiency, hygiene, and all that. So, I mean, both of you have reflected on these issues, and we can get back to them on other issues with your inputs. So, the question that we have not touched upon at all, and there are many questions, but as I said, that is on future of electric mobility. Now, how do we do that in the crisis period? How do we take that agenda forward? So can both of you reflect on that?
You want to start, Laghu, or?
First, and then Laghu can say.
Okay, the issue of electric mobility actually is not really a COVID related topic. It's a topic that is there in cities all over the world, and everybody is talking about it. And that is the future direction of the entire delivery of the transport systems and the energy that backs it. So and a lot of conversations are happening. The good news here is that the electric buses on a total life cycle cost basis have already started to become economically viable. Of course, from a capital perspective, there are still issues, and I think governments or the funding agencies they need to start looking at the funding models. And as far as I know, a lot of and I'm advising a number of international agencies on this. A lot of international agencies have come forward and they're ready to provide capital support as long as the proper operating model is in place. So idea is to get the initial kick from somebody, and then you start to, because if you look at it, fuel and energy cost is about 60% less. The maintenance cost is 50% less for an electric bus. On a life cycle basis, that immediately starts to have a cash flow benefit. So it's only the first start that is difficult, where you need to put in a lot of capital. And that can come from development agencies. And once you start that, then the cycle will just continue after that.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Alok. So if we quickly, Raghu, if you can reflect on the fact that how India can leverage the whole stimulus and economic recovery package that is going to go to the automobile industry, as well as to the city authorities and for public transport reforms, how can we leverage and strategize? What would be the best way to move forward on electric mobility now in this, under the current circumstances?
So as Alok said, I think eventually, having said that, whatever the advantage we have due to the electric mobility, like less maintenance cost and the less energy cost and whatever the life cycle saving. But I think the bigger question remains the huge capital cost, okay, which is as high as 2.5 times to 3 times. And we, as I said, we were never be good when it comes on finances of bus transport, okay. And this COVID situation, the things are going to become worst, okay. And especially when the ridership will be less and our fixed cost are as high as 60 to 65%. Whether we operate the buses or we don't operate the buses, fixed costs are very high, okay. So that are not going to be impacted by any transitioning of e-mobility or any kind of things. Those sustainably require other kind of reforms, which has nothing with the I think the electric mobility. But having said that, eventually we know that this cost are going to go down. There might be impact on the data at a city level or STU level on a short term or immediate term, but eventually they have to again adopt the transitioning plan which they were planning previously. But I would say yes, the pace will be that much. And as far as I know, the cities have already started exploring that whether they can postpone this e-mobility transition for a time being, because that is not a priority. They are already in a crisis situation and financial stress situation. Yeah.
Great. So I'm already getting signal now from my administrator that we are almost reached the time is over. So, at the same time, when I'm just looking at the chat box and the question answer box, and I can see there are many, many questions still. So and I really apologize to everyone that we cannot take each and every question in this session. There is a lot, so much of this, but what I can see that broadly, we have all touched upon the key, the genre of questions that have come our way. And what we will do now, with help of Raghu and Alok, we will give more precise and detailed answers and put them up on the website. And you can take a look and we can keep the interaction and engagement going. And therefore, I will not even attempt to even summarize, because it's been so rich in what we have heard from our panelists is amazing. But what is also fascinating, it has given us a certain sense of how do we need to move forward. The practical solutions, we have understood how other cities are doing it, how Hong Kong is doing it, and this whole practical dimension of dealing with the crisis has been hugely insightful. But the only one question that drew my attention when I was going there, it says that how do you generate political will for the change now? And I think that is really the defining question for the day. But I strongly believe that with the kind of change we have collectively experienced globally and in this country, the blue sky that we have seen, the traffic-free road that we have seen, the healthy environment that we have sensed and experienced, there's a lot at stake. And if publicly and as a collective, we recognize the value of this, then I'm sure that this reconstruction and rebuilding process that is going to happen now, we can build public support. And if we can build public support for this kind of difficult decisions, tough roadmap, that will certainly change the political mindset as well. Public support also brings political support. So if we are all in it together, then let's build energy, let's build the knowledge, and let's build information and the support for all the strategies that we have discussed today. So let's not this be the end line. This is only a beginning of the engagement, and I really hope to continue to do this. And with that, I would like to thank Alok, Laghu for the wonderful information, knowledge, and wisdom that you have shared with us to go forward. My colleague Shayan and Ananya for all the wonderful research that you have done, and my other colleagues, and the audience who have been with us. As I said, there are 700 in this virtual room. So this is a great beginning. This is exciting. So let's learn from this crisis, even as we want this humanitarian crisis to end as quickly as possible. But don't let this crisis go waste. So let's learn, move on, and move towards the new normal. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Also, people have been asking about the video. I think our Facebook page, homepage has this video, so you can check there. There have been questions.
Right. Yes.